Hello children, welcome to the session of Advanced Web Designing. Today we will be learning the types of selectors for CSS. Basically, a CSS comprises of style rules that are interpreted by the browser and then applied to the corresponding elements in the HTML document. Now, there is a CSS rule syntax which goes like this. We have the selector or the HTML element and then the opening of the curly braces followed by the property, then it is separated by a colon and then it is followed by the value which is assigned to the property and terminated by a semicolon which marks the end of the statement, and again the braces, curly braces are closed. Example, for single assignment, H1 is the selector and font size is the property. Providing a value of 25 pixels to the font size property of the selector ensures that the contents of all the data that is in between the opening and closing of the H1 tag will be displayed at a font size of 25 pixels. And whatever changes are there in the rules must be within the opening and closing of the curly braces. In font size 25 pixels, the part before the colon is the property while the remainder is the value applied to it. Now let us see the multiple assignment. It can be assigned in a couple of ways. In the first example, we can see the properties have been concatenated using a semicolon and it is written in a single line. We can also write it like this, where selector is written at the top and then you have the opening of the curly braces followed by the properties and the values are neatly lined up one above the other. And then they are terminated by the semicolon. So it can be written in two lines also. Or it can be written in this way. The selectors H1 are written in two separate lines and different properties are assigned to the selector. Now while the browser renders, CSS will combine all those rules and the styles will be easily applied to the HTML elements, and finally the page will look as what was expected. Now in this case we can see the same selector has been written twice but with different values. So this happens in most of the times because in real life web pages there will be multiple style sheets that are applied. So in this case, the last value would apply. Depending on the styles of the HTML elements, there are different types of selector. You have the CSS ID Selector, CSS Class Selector, Universal Selector and Group Selector. The first one is the CSS ID Selector. So as the name indicates, ID is always unique. So in this case also the ID selector is unique within the page for an element, and it is defined by a hash symbol followed by the ID name and then the declaration part within the curly braces. We can have more than one property in the declaration part with the semicolons in between them. Now in this we can see the ID selector name is Arial. So we can use that selector name as an attribute in the HTML element. In this case, P is the element and the attribute is the ID, which has been assigned the ID name as Arial. And hello students is the sentence which is written between the paragraph tags. So now this hello students will be written in the font of Arial. There can be more than one element which can use this ID of Arial. once we have declared the ID for a element and again we are using that element in the subsequent lines, then this property will not, or this style will not be applied to those paragraph tags. Now let us see one example to understand this better. Now within the style tag, the ID selector is Arial and we have different properties declared within the curly braces. The font family is Arial, text align is center, font weight is bolder, color is blue, letter spacing is 5px. Now in the H1 tag, we are using the ID selector as Arial and the sentence that is written within the H1 tag is Advanced Web Design. So this entire style will be applied to this H1 tag because it is occurring for the first time. Now here is the output for it, that it is centered, aligned, the font is Arial, the font weight is bold, the color is blue and the letter spacing is 5px. Now in the next statement we can see that the paragraph tag is used, which is also using the same ID selector as Arial. We have written a sentence, we have been introduced to basic terminologies related to the creation of web pages. So again that style has been applied to the paragraph tag. Now during the second occurrence of the H1 tag, we see that this style has not been applied to the H1 tag. This means that ID can be applied within a document for the first occurrence. But different elements can directly reference any IDs that have the same name as long as they occur within different element types. Next one is the CSS Class Selector. When there are a number of elements in a page that we want to share the same name styling, then we can assign them the same class name. Now in this it is used with a period, that is a full stop, and it is used when we want to change or apply the setting to a group of elements within the HTML page. For example, if there are several elements like paragraph, H1, H2 tags defined within the web page and we want to apply the same style to all those elements at once, then in that case we can make use of this class selector. Now there are two ways of selecting the class selector. The first one is of a generic type of class selector. Now this type of class selector, it begins with a dot, as we can see it here. Okay, this is the class selector, generic type of class selector, and this is the declaration part. So this type of class selector can be used with several elements like H1, paragraph, H2 tags, and once we have used this class, then all those HTML elements can be modified as per this rule, CSS rule. The second one is the specific type of class selector. Now in this we have to assign a HTML element along with the class selector name. So this narrows down the scope of action of a class by specifying the types of elements to which it should apply. Like in this case, it is the H class which is specific to H1 tag only. So this class selector can be used only with the H1. It cannot be used with H2 or paragraph. So we'll just see the properties. For the generic class, the alignment is center and the color is blue, while for the specific class the alignment is right and the color is red. So let us use this example and see. Now here is we have declared the styles. One is a generic class with the alignment as center and the color blue. The second one is the specific class selector with the text alignment as right and the color is red. So in this we are using the generic class and apply it to h1 tag. So here is the output. The output is aligned to the center and the font color is blue. In the second line, it is the specific class selector where the text alignment is right and the color is red. So in this case also we can see it has been properly modified as per the rule. Now let us go to the second tag, that is the h2 tag. When we are using the generic class tag or h2 tag, then it is properly applied and modified as per the given rules. That is, the text alignment is center and the color is blue. Now let us go to the specific class. As it was specified only for h1 tag, it cannot be used for h2. Although we have assigned it, but still the h2 tag is not modified. It doesn't get affected and the output is what h2 tag normally works, like it is left aligned with the h2 default font. So here we can see there are two types and the output is as per their class selector rules. Now the next is the group selector. When we want the same style to be applied to more than one element or selector or class, then we use a group selector. The grouping selector is used to select all the elements within the same style definition. Now by using CSS we can apply the same set of rules or styles to more than one element, selector or class. It also minimizes the code because we don't have to define those rules for each and every element or selector or class again and again. Now every selector or the element is separated by a comma. Now in this example we can see it is the example of the element selector. There are three tags of heading h1, h2, h3 which have been given the common style, that is the text color is green, font weight is normal, letter spacing is 5 pixel, margin left is 25 pixel and the text decoration is underlined. So we will apply this style to the code and we will check the output. Now there is another feature also of group selector, which is we can combine various class selectors. We have already studied the ID selector, the class selector, and this is the group selector. Also there is an element selector. So in this we can see the first is the ID selector, then the second is the group selector and the element selector. So all these three selectors also can be grouped using this group selector, where all these selectors will have the common style definition. Now let us see the example. Now this is the example where we have applied the common style rule to h1, h2, h3. So we can see here the code h1 group selector. I have just given the name as group selector so it becomes easier, and it is margin left, so 25 pixel is left from the left hand side. The color is green, the font weight is also normal, the letter spacing between each character is 5 pixel, and it is the text decoration is underlined. So all these three tags have been modified as per the style rule. Now I have also defined another tag, h4 tag, which is a normal tag. So this is not affected because we have not applied or included the h4 tag in the grouping selector as a grouping selector. So this h4 was not affected and hence it was not modified as per the style rule. Now again I have used the same rules again, like h1, h2, h3 have been repeated. The reason behind doing this was we will compare the working of the group selector with the ID selector and the class selector as well. Now once we have declared the style for the h1, h2, h3 tags, and we are using those tags in the code any number of times, the styles are applied to the content within the tags, right? As we can see it here, we have repeated h1, so the style was applied to the text. But in case we are using we had declared the ID tag, ID selector in the style, then it would have been applied to h1 only, and the format or the syntax of using this class ID tag was also different. We had to assign that value in the h1 tag, but not in this case. This is done only once. Similarly, for the class tag also, we had to call that class tag by assigning the value in the h1 tag as an attribute. But this is not required for this group selector. Once we are declaring it in the style, then we can call it as many times or use it as many times in the code. The next example is of the CSS Universal Selector. It begins with an asterisk. This is this asterisk symbol, and by using this we can apply the style to all the elements on the web pages. For example, this is a style which is being defined using a universal selector asterisk, and the property is a color which is red, and the font family is monotype cursive. So whatever elements are present on the web page, it will select all the elements and apply this style rule to those elements. Let us see the example. We have used a universal selector. It can be easily identified by this asterisk symbol, and there are two properties which have been defined for this universal selector. One is a text color which is red, and the font family which is a monotype cursive. So in the body we can see I have used 5 tags, h1 till h4, and a paragraph tag. I have not used any style within the code. So when we are defining this universal selector in the style, this style is applied to all the elements which will be present in the web page. As we can see in this output, all the tags and the tags have been affected by this style rule. So h1, h2, h3, h4 and paragraph, they all have been have the font color as red, and the font family is monotype cursive. So this is the use of the universal selector.